All right. Well, thanks for tuning into another episode of the WhyInfluence podcast. Today, we got an awesome guest. His name is Justin Schenck, and he's been podcasting for several years now. He helps other people with podcasting. He has a community event based around podcasting and getting your voice out there in a bigger way. So he's got a ton of wisdom. He's got over 2 million downloads on his podcast. It's a very established podcast. It's just an honor to have you here today, Justin. Thanks so much.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you, man. It's an honor for me to be here and be able to chat with your audience and you, and talk, we'll talk podcasting, we'll talk life, and see where it goes.
Yeah, sounds great. And I appreciate you sticking around. I know we just got off the weekly meetup just now, so it's a little bit back to back. So we did an hour and a half there, and now we got this time here. So I appreciate your time.
Yeah, man, for sure.
So in 2 or 3 sentences, or just briefly, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in your voice?
Yeah, I'm your typical 2020 entrepreneur. I've created multiple streams of income to support my lifestyle, but it all started with a podcast. So I like to say that I'm a podcaster and an entrepreneur who started podcasting about 4.5 years ago, got recognized by Inc. magazine as a top 8 podcast every entrepreneur should follow, and the rest followed, right? The business became an organic growth type of thing. And I started speaking all over the country. And so it was all the idea and the premise of I bought a microphone 4.5 years ago and the rest came after. And I'm sure we'll get into the whole entire story of that.
Yeah. Awesome. I see some people are tuning in here. We got the Extraordinary Podcast saying, oh yeah. And we got Savvy saying, hey.
Love it.
Thanks for tuning in. All right, so let's just start off with some advice. You talk to a lot of podcasters that want to start out and get started. So what's some of your biggest advice for a new podcaster?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things that I want to focus on is number one, if you're going to start a podcast, figure out your why, right? Perfect reason or perfect name for your show. Figure out why are you doing it? Like, I think a lot of people now are jumping into the arena of podcasting because it's the cool thing to do. Everybody's doing it, so I got to have a podcast. Or your friend Mary has said 19 times, you should really have a podcast and talk about that. But figure out what's the reason, because there's a lot of work that goes into podcasts. It takes a while to grow an audience. It takes consistency to grow an audience. So if you can tie it to a why beyond an audience growth, whether it's to make an impact, whether it's to use as a marketing arm for your business, whether it's to whatever, right? Build great relationships. Figure that out first. And then that way you have a goal beyond just, okay, I just need to show up every single week and hopefully somebody tunes in. So I would say tie a why to what you're doing. Give yourself a reason to actually be doing it other than your friend told you to. And then be very, very consistent. Like, show up for your audience, continue to deliver value for them, stuff like that. Because what I realize is people show up, they start a podcast, they think they're going to get thousands of downloads day one, and that's just not the case. And then they'll quit, right? I think the statistic states that 78% of people who start a podcast don't make it past their first 7 episodes. So the realization of the amount of work that it takes versus the return day one it doesn't equal each other. So just tie a why to it.
Yeah, great advice. I agree. I think tying a why to it is definitely really important. It helps you overcome those barriers to starting because, maybe you don't want to put your voice out there or you're self-conscious. And if your why is strong enough, then, it lowers the barriers across the board for a lot of stuff too.
For sure.
Awesome. So you also talk to a ton of established podcasters and you're also an established podcast yourself. So what do you think would be some secret sauce that you're doing that's different than the average podcaster that you feel like maybe some other established podcasters could utilize to help them, grow?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is, and I kind of touched on it earlier, is consistency is key. But I want to talk about the reason you do that, right? Like when you talk about like going live on Facebook, you can go live anytime and people will show up if they're scrolling and they'll find you and they'll tune in, right? Podcasts don't work that way. Like it doesn't usually just randomly pop up and be like, I'm live now, come listen. So the key is to show up at the same time every single week in the same way and give your audience what they're expecting. And the thing that I say is like, look, podcast listeners are creatures of habit. And so we have to understand that they will literally put you into their routine. It's not even necessarily they love your show. Like, let's get out of our ego a little bit. It's not always that they love your show. It's that you become part of the routine, whether they're listening to you on the Tuesday when they work out, or Tuesday in their commute to work, or Friday when they're washing the dishes or whatever. You become part of the routine. If you're not there when that routine pops up, they're going to go find another show to listen to. And again, let's remove the ego. Your show's probably not as good as the next show they're going to find, so they're not coming back, right? So show up for them, continue to add value with what they want and what they need. And what's going to happen is you're going to have that organic growth. The number one way to grow your show is still word of mouth. So going out and making sure that the people that are listening to your show are telling their friends. And so one thing I always say is try really hard to be the third podcast they mention. So why the third podcast, right? Everybody who's podcast listeners listen to multiple. It's just the facts. And so everybody listens to Joe Rogan. That's the reality. Like, it's insane how many people listen to that guy. A ton of people listen to like a Gary Vee or a Lewis Howes or something like that. So they're going to say the first two that they listen to, and the person they're saying this to also listens to them. And the third one is they go, okay, well, I also listen to the Growth Now movement. And the person goes, what's the Growth Now movement? And they go, it's the show hosted by this guy named Justin. You should really check it out. It's great. And that person's going to go check it out. So always be the third person that they mention. And you do that, again, by delivering to your audience what they expect, what they need. And you do that by listening to the feedback that you're getting versus continuously trying to push what it is you want to push.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I could see how, becoming part of the habit could really contribute. And if you break that habit, there's a lot of other alternatives out there. So it's pretty easy to lose. So as a little bit of a follow-up to that, would you consider it more important to have that consistency versus frequency? Like, let's say you posted once a week at the exact same time versus maybe an average 1.25 times a week, but it's not as consistent. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do, but it's not this is a solid way to do it kind of opinion, and this is more trial and error on my part. And I shared this in your group as well. But when I started the podcast, I had an episode every single Tuesday, which I still have today, which is the interview. And then at one point I added a small 5-minute Friday, which I called my weekly moment of growth. And I just it's me sharing stories. It's me sharing things that I've learned, stuff like that. And from that standpoint, I saw numbers increase because people had time on their hands. People were busy. People were going to work so they could have more time to listen when they were either working or commuting or whatever. Then COVID hit, and people stopped showing up. They stopped downloading the show. Like, my numbers drastically decreased. And I was like, what's going on? And so I decided, not because of the numbers, because I'm not totally locked into my numbers, to be completely frank, but it wasn't totally because of the numbers. I just needed a break from creating my own content. So I kept showing up with the interviews, which is the consistent, right? And I stopped doing the weekly moments of growth, and my numbers on my interviews shot up. And I feel like it's because I wasn't overwhelming them with content. So sometimes it's seasons, right? Like, but at the same time, I still show up at least once a week. I always tell people that when they're coming on board, for yourself, it's usually easier to dial back than it is to dial up. So say you're showing up and you first start out and you're every other week, right? Just as this is an example, you're every other week. And those people go, okay, cool. Like, I'm blocked in. I know every other week it's showing up. Then all of a sudden you start adding every week. Well, they might have another show that they're adding on that week. So I always like to say, start out as what capacity you feel like you can do and dial back as needed, whether it be time or the numbers just aren't there, or whatever the case may be. But play with it a little bit, right? Like, find out what they want. Like, pay attention to the numbers, pay attention to what they're saying, pay attention to what they're actually reacting to, and then give more of that. Like, I've shifted in the last year to speak a little bit more about business, because those are the episodes that were doing better than the others. And so I decided to deliver more on that. And so consistency, yes, but also be able to be a little bit flexible for your audience.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of feedback's gonna be different for every person. So you definitely have to make sure you experiment and look at the analytics and see how things are trending, because maybe someone else in your shoes, so they would see like different results.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the advice. Let's jump into your story a little bit here. What did your sharing world look like when you first started your podcast? Like, were you sharing on Facebook, LinkedIn? Like, were you already blogging? Or was podcasting sort of your cold turkey jump into it?
Yeah, I mean, podcasting was my cold turkey jump into it. But to give a little bit of backstory, because that's not 100% true. And a number of years earlier, I did own a company that we put together seminars and expos that focus on personal and professional growth, because I knew my passion was helping people discover what it is they're meant to do, and if they already know that, to help them do it a little bit better. right? So to turn up the knobs a little bit, so to say. And I knew that was my passion. So I tried to do a business years ago that ended up failing after about a year and a half of being in operation. And that's a longer story in itself. We won't get into it. And so then I went on hiatus for a couple of years, and I was in the corporate world, and I did well in the corporate world, but something was missing. And so I wanted to get back to that. I didn't think podcasting was going to be the business. Like I thought podcasting was going to give me an opportunity to learn how to do business better. The original idea was, let me interview successful entrepreneurs so I can learn how to do this entrepreneur thing better. Because I suck. At this point, I had 3 failed businesses. Like I was like, I'm missing the boat somewhere, right? So let me learn. And 5 months before I launched the podcast, my mom lost her 20-year battle to opioids. And it completely changed the perspective of everything that I'm doing, or everything that I thought life was about. Like I thought life was about going out, working hard, getting things so people can go, wow, look at that guy's things. And that's just not the case. Like life is about enjoying the journey, the ups, the downs, being happy, being loved, giving as much as you can. And so the podcast became about that. And what I realized was when I was doing this, I was like, okay, I'm going to share these people's journey. So hopefully one day people are interested in my journey. And that's what organically happened over time. And it really shifted when Inc. magazine listed me as a top 8 podcast, when my audience numbers quadrupled overnight. People were reaching out saying, hey, we want you to come speak at this event. But it was because I was true to my intention. Like my intention was I want to impact lives. And then the greater intention was I want to impact lives with my story. And so I was able to do that by what we were talking about before, consistently showing up, listening to my audience, giving them what they need. And then the rest kind of followed. So to answer your question, my online presence for many years was me. Like I see my time hop now and I'm like, I can't believe I posted that on social media. Like it's just ridiculous, right? It was just very much how most people use social media. And then I started podcasting. Then I started to become friends with podcasters and learned what it's all about and learned what I had to do. And the messaging and the branding online became that. So the podcast was the first step into, okay, let me put myself out there. And then the social media followed, and a really big focus at first on Facebook because I had a little bit of a following at some point. I had a couple hundred followers from the past who were into the event thing that I did. And then some friends. And then I tried to do Instagram, and Instagram took a while, but first it was Facebook, but now I love Instagram. That's where I'm hanging out now.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you started the podcast pretty much cold turkey. You didn't have any much following anywhere else. So you just started the podcast, and you did it because you wanted to learn about entrepreneurship. You wanted to get people to sort of start to care about your journey by just getting a relationship with them slowly over time. And then you also had this really impactful thing happen with your mom where you realized life is short and you wanted to do something that was more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. And to add to that, man, like I always talk about when I go super far back into my life, like if I was when I was still in high school, I jokingly say that if there was a senior superlative for least likely to succeed, that would have been me. I had a 1.7 GPA. My mom was in the middle of her opioid addiction and my dad was in jail. And so like all signs pointed to you've got no shot, kid. Like literally, like I think the statistics say that if your parent's an addict, you have a 50% chance of being an addict. If your parent's in jail, you have a 50% chance of going to jail. Like I'm 100% screwed at this point, right? And so when I realized through life, and then at the age of 19, I got introduced to self-development, and it was the book Who Moved My Cheese. And that book essentially talks about things are going to happen around you. Bad things are going to happen. Things are going to change. But it's up to you of how you react to that. Right. And I adopted the saying, life is 90% of or 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to what happens to you. And from there on forth, it became my own personal journey of growth. Right. And so that's what I realized I was doing subconsciously was let me keep getting better every single day of my life. Let me just keep getting a nudge better. Let me get closer to my goals. Let me figure out this whole life thing. But when my mom passed away, what it did was, and I always say this, my mom didn't die because she was addicted to opioids. My mom died because she didn't like herself. She thought that her rock bottom moment was her permanent position in life. And so how can I make people realize that there's hope in those rock bottom moments? That's what it opened my eyes to. It wasn't just, oh, well, you learned that at 19 and you made the 1% incremental wins every day. It was, how do I then make other people see that? How do I make other people realize that there's hope even when you feel hopeless? And that's what the show became about organically. So yeah, I mean,
It's
I'm a
powerful.
big, yeah, thanks, man. I'm a big believer that those rock bottom moments are the reason that we're here. And it's the greatest opportunity to jump forward in life.
Yeah, that's powerful. Congrats, by the way, just on overcoming, all those barriers that were in your way and all this growth that you've had.
Oh, thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about when you started your podcast. I'm curious what that landscape looked like. Could you have started earlier? Did you wait to post it? Were there any kind of barriers that you had to overcome? Were you nervous? What did it look like?
Yes to all of those, right? Like, I'd probably been listening to a podcast at the time for about a year. And I'd probably been thinking about it for about a year, if not 2 years. And then part of my story is I was planning the podcast when my mom passed away, and that was 5 months before I launched the podcast. You know, Jeremy, as well as I do, you can launch a podcast in 2 weeks. Like, why did it take me 5 months? Right? Like that makes no sense. And that was always, by the way, that was always the planned timeline. It wasn't because my mom passed away, it pushed back. Like that was always the planned timeline. But a lot of that came from nervousness. Like, what would people think? I'm putting myself out there, right? Like all of these things. Like what's the saying? You can't be a prophet in your own hometown. Like I was so nervous about what these people would think, and how they would judge me, and like all of these things. So the nerves were certainly there. But a lot of the learning curve, like I bought a course online and learned how to edit and learned how to post it on social or post it onto the platforms and all that stuff. So I learned that just through a course. But honestly, the landscaping of podcasting was just so different back then. Like I say all the time, when I started 4.5 years ago, I would tell people I had a podcast and they would go, "What's a podcast?" And now you say it and they go, "Oh yeah, you too. Everybody's got a podcast." and that's the reality. I mean, when I started, it was probably under 200,000 podcasts. And then actually the first quarter of 2019 or 2020, I don't remember which year anymore because of COVID, I'm lost all the time. There were like 250,000 podcasts that launched in a quarter, and there's over 1 million active podcasts now. And so it's a completely different landscape. So I was jumping in not only in the unknown of my own abilities, but in the unknown of like, what is the podcasting even, right? Like I listened to one show, like I didn't know what I was doing. But I also think ignorance is bliss sometimes. And like that imperfect action is going to get you to where you need to go.
Yeah. And you took action. I just did a quick Google search. Yeah. There's over 1 million podcasts with over 30 million episodes. So
yeah, it's crazy. It's a lot of content.
Yeah. So, how did you talked about being nervous. Like, how did you overcome that nervousness to actually hit that post? Like, did you share it with your personal community, or did you just sort of silently like launch it and then wait to share it? Like,
yeah. So I'm glad you asked this, because part of this is I launched the podcast with a co-host. And so when people say, if you could go back to the beginning and do something different, what would it be? And it was hard for me to figure out what that was at first, because a lot of my mistakes became my teaching points for my clients. So those mistakes were very important for my business. But the one thing I would change is I would have launched it by myself. I had a co-host because it helped the nerves. It had somebody to push me, and I pushed him to be like, "No, we got this. We got this together. If we fail, we fail together. It's not just on me." So I used it as a crutch. Whereas if I started by myself originally, the fact that my show didn't grow right away was that reason, because our branding and our messaging were mixed up, because he was talking about one thing, I was talking about another. We didn't have a cohesive, who's the leader in the podcast. Like there was so much you should have done with a co-host that we didn't do because we didn't know. Yeah. And so yeah, what made me push it was because it wasn't just me. Like I was carrying somebody else with me. So I used that as a way to be like, well, we got to do this. We're doing this together. We're putting in the work together. And so I would say to anybody, like, if you're using that as a crutch, just go do it on your own. Like if you're the true leader in that duo, go do it on your own, because you're going to find your audience a lot quicker that way.
Nice. Yeah, that's great advice. And for me, I didn't have the intention to do it with anybody. So when I started, it was just me, but I was very uncomfortable sharing by myself. So I got a friend to be the guest host to interview me on my episode 0. So like it sort of was like, a little easier for me to jump into it, having 2 people there and someone questioning me, as opposed to just talking to a microphone when I had no experience doing that.
Yeah, that's smart. Like, yes, there is a way to do that and but I also now live in a world of like, I'm constantly uncomfortable. Like I'm constantly pushing myself to do the next thing that seems a little scary. Like when I was doing the live event, I'm like, who's going to show up? Like, I don't know, but I'm going to try. I'm going to put it out there and see what happens. And then switching to virtual, me going, I have no idea how to run any of this platform that we're running it on. I'm a team of one to do this virtual event. Like, it's this crazy thing. But at the same time, like, you have to get uncomfortable in order to grow. Like, if you're not uncomfortable, if you're super comfortable, like, you're not growing. And God bless you if you're happy doing that, but I'm not happy being super comfortable and not growing. That's just the reality. But like you said, you made yourself a little comfortable on day one, but that's what gave you the push to move forward. And I'm sure, even though I say that's the one thing I would change, if I went back and changed it to just being me, I don't know if I would have ever hit send.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, maybe you would never start.
Right.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the next steps there. So you overcame the barriers. You had a friend that you did the podcast with. You got it started, and like, where to go from there? Like, how long did you do it with this partner before you guys sort of split up?
So we did it for 64 episodes together. So it was a long time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was a little over a year. We did it together. And the original plan, honestly, was, okay, it wasn't growing. We're like, let's take a breather. Let's reset. He got super busy. So he ended up, I'm sharing it. I don't care, Zach. His name is Zach, by the way. We're still really good friends. Zach got his girlfriend pregnant. And so things got crazy. And we're like, okay, we're going to take a step back and reset, and we'll come back for season 2. So we ended season 1. We had our most downloaded guest at the time come back for that episode. And then we took time off. And during that break, I got the big aha moment of, you need to be doing this alone. And so I had a conversation with him during the break where I was like, hey, man, like, I'm thinking about doing this on my own. How do you feel about that? And he's like, yeah. He's like, this has always been your thing anyway. You're way better at it than I am.
Oh, wow.
Go ahead. And so I went and took it off on my own. And that's when the audience began to grow organically. And that's where I found, like, in podcasting, the idea that, like, your branding and your messaging have to be so on point. Because there were people that were finding us when we were a team, but then it was like all discombobulated. So they weren't sticking around. And so when it got really clean and I understood my messaging, that's when stuff started to grow organically, because the people started, oh, hey, check this out. And then I realized people were tagging me on social media saying, hey, I just listened to this episode. You should listen too. And like all that stuff. And I was like, wow, okay, this is making sense. And you start to get that traction. And then locally people are like, hey, I listened to your show, like weird stuff. You go to the coffee shop and all that. But, when you start to really lock in what it is your purpose is, and that does match your branding, your audience is going to find you, and then they're going to stick around. And so that was really kind of the relaunch. It wasn't really season 2. It was just the relaunch of whatever. And then I've been showing up every single Tuesday ever since then. Tuesday at 3 a.m. Eastern. There's an episode that drops every single week.
Yeah, and that's another, 3 years pretty much on your own, because you've been doing this over 4 years now, right?
Yeah, so it's been about 4.5 years now of just constantly showing up, man. Even when nobody else was showing up to listen, I was showing up, and it's been, and don't get me wrong, like, even if I still was back at the no audience, I'd still be doing it. Like, I shared a story in your community about super early on, somebody reached out to me. It's not because of your show I decided not to take my own life. And I realized that impact isn't these millions of numbers and millions of followers that people tout around. Impact is really whose life are you changing in a positive way. And it doesn't need to be, I talk about those types of things on the show at times, so that's why it was that. But like, it could be like your show could lead to a change in somebody's business that makes them from going to, I was about to be evicted, to I can go buy my own home. Like, change a life, one life, and that's all that you need to do. And I'd keep showing up for that and the relationships that I've built. I mean, I get to call some of the most incredible people in the world my friends. And I feel blessed every day because of that.
Yeah. I mean, so, if you're listening now, this is just a reiteration of why the why is so important, because Justin did his podcast and kept showing up even when there were times when nobody else would show up. But because his why was powerful enough, he pushed through that. And that's why he's here today talking with us, because he had that powerful why to keep going when the times weren't as easy.
Yeah.
So, and your why changed. So now you're talking about you're keeping going because you've saved lives with your podcast. You've made new friends. That wasn't stuff that was your why starting out. Like, you didn't start out saying, hey, I'm going to save people's lives with this.
Yeah. I think sometimes our whys evolve with us, right? Like, originally it was, like I had mentioned, I was like, I want to learn how to be a better entrepreneur, because clearly I'm not good at it. And that was the original why of doing the podcast. And then my mom passed away and I found myself in not a great spot. And I realized that I wasn't truly doing the work I needed to do to become a better person. So my why became, let me learn how to be a better person. Let me learn how to tap into happiness. Let me learn how to be a better significant other to my girlfriend. Let me learn how to be all of these things. And so when you go early on in the podcast, those questions were for me. Like I was learning, I was growing. So the growth now was about me. Like I was like, cool, like I need to grow. And then I got to a certain point, my audience grew and I was landing in success in my business and my relationships and my family with my business partners, all these things. And it became about so much more. Now, how do I teach other people how to do that? And then the why became, let me build a community of people that support each other, lift each other up, and help each other reach their goals. And that's what happened when I did the live event. And so that's like the thing of like, as I evolve as a person, as I'm able to carry more, I don't want to say burden, but as I'm able to carry more responsibility, as I'm able to take on more because I've done the work to get better, I can then empower others to do it. And so if your why is still the same, like if it hasn't evolved in some way, shape, or form, let's do more work to get you to really capture that why as soon as possible so we can evolve that why and you can impact more people.
That's really powerful stuff. I mean, I couldn't agree more. The reason I started my podcast is because I wondered why other people were sharing because I never really cared to share and never did share. So there's a lot of reasons for me to be learning. So as opposed to like you do meet a lot of people. It's like I started a podcast to get clients and stuff. So there's different kinds of people that are starting things for different reasons. Yeah. And I think me and you are definitely a self-development driven.
Yeah, dude. And look, there's nothing wrong with using podcasts that way too. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Again, like I know people who use it to get clients. I know people who use it as a top of funnel sales approach. Like there are so many different things that people use it for. Now, don't get me wrong. Like there are great, like the impact is the reason why, but I've also realized it's a great platform builder for me. Like I get asked to speak before COVID, I get asked to speak on stages all over the country because of my podcast. It created a platform for me to stand on. And so there's other reasons too, beyond just impact, because, at the end of the day, we need to fill our own cup up, right? Like we need to make sure that we are healthy. We need to make sure that we are happy. We need to make sure that we are abundant in all things, because if we're able to be abundant in all things, we can serve more people. I had a guy on my show, and I always like to give credit where credit's due. A guy named Preston Smiles was on my show, and he goes, "What's in my cup is for me. Whatever flows is for everybody else. But you can't pour from an empty cup." And right. So I also learned that lesson the hard way because I was helping everybody for free. And then I was stressed out and struggling, and not anymore. I also found out that free advice doesn't help because people don't put in the work. And so for me, it was about, okay, let me make sure my cup is full and let me make sure my cup is overflowing a massive amount so I can just give to every single person I come in contact with, give of myself, give of my resources, give of my time. And that's really now a massive goal of mine, is to continue to give. Like somebody asked me the other day, like, where do you see yourself as an old man? And I go, just like me, but more abundant, giving more. You know what I mean? Like that's just the reality. Like continue to grow and be better and give more as much as I can,
Yeah, that's awesome. I couldn't agree more. Savvy, a quick comment. He said, "This has been one of the best episodes I've seen." Thanks, Savvy. It's been great.
Appreciate it, man.
So what are some moments, through your journey, anywhere from when you started to where you are today, that come to mind for when you have given yourself permission to take that next step? Because I think that the way you've been talking about it, you have been operating like right around your limit and comfort zone pretty much the whole time. But sometimes taking those big leaps requires giving yourself permission. So what comes to mind for you there?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story about not a time that I purposely took a leap, but I was forced to take a leap. The last job that I ever had, I was building this business on the side. I was working full time while doing the podcast, while building the podcast production, coaching company, all that stuff. And I got fired from my last job. And I actually, right before I got fired, like a couple of weeks before I got fired, I agreed to speak at an event. Now, this is before I was paid to speak at events. So I was speaking for free, paying my own way, buying my airplane ticket, buying my hotel, paying for my food, all those things. And I got fired. And then I had a choice to make. And the two choices were this. One, pay my rent. Take the money that I had left and paid my rent. I did well in the corporate world, but I also spent everything that I made. So I was a paycheck to paycheck rich man. And so I go, okay, I'm either going to pay my rent or I'm going to go speak at this event. And I go, no, these are the moments that people talk about in entrepreneurship of showing up when you're not 100% comfortable. And so I said yes. I said yes to abundance. I said yes to going down and speaking. And I flew down to the event. I spoke at the event. Afterwards, one of the nights, a bunch of the speakers went out for a drink. So first of all, I was worried about paying my rent, let alone buying beverages. So we go out. It was me, a guy named Mike Kim, who you should know, by the way, a really great guy, and a bunch of other people. And they're all very successful at this point, very successful entrepreneurs, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, right? And so I'm sitting there and Mike orders a drink, which ends up being a $65 drink. And they go around the table and everybody orders the same drink. It comes to me. And of course, me feeling like I had to keep up with the Joneses, I go, I'll have one too. And I'm like, I hope my credit card goes through. I have no idea what's going on. The waitress comes back and says, oh, can I get you guys anything else? And I'm like, no, just get the check, please. And Mike goes, I'll have another one. And it goes around the table and everybody else ordered another one. And so I was like, I'll have another one too, as I'm like freaking out. So Mike Kim ended up buying everybody's drinks. So that was one thing. But this is the important part of the story. Mike shared information with me, which completely shifted my focus and my mindset about what my business was. And I made $22,000 in the next 3 weeks because of that conversation. And so the point is, you show up when the world says, I don't, it's going to be a little tough. Those are the times you show up. Those are the shifts you make in your life. You get uncomfortable in order to receive abundance in your life. If I said no to that, I'd be working a corporate job right now. I know that for 100% fact that I would be somewhere working a corporate job in marketing management, whatever, and miserable like I was then if I didn't have that conversation with Mike. And so it's just a game-changing scenario when you can say yes when your back's up against the wall.
Yeah, and at that time you were like on the border of not going. And if you hadn't gone, your world would be completely different today. And that's because you gave yourself permission to be like, all right, let's do this.
Exactly. I for the first time, I believed in myself. I believed in myself to go make my own money, to go make my own freedom, my own income, all these things. Before I didn't really believe in myself. I wanted it, but there was no belief in myself. And so being able to get uncomfortable and going, no, I'm going to believe in myself right now. Like I'm going to do what these people that I admire say that I should do for once. And I'm going to go do it. And it paid off, man. Yeah. I feel I'm indebted to Mike Kim. He's actually one of the speakers at my event. I'm just indebted to that man so much. He doesn't even realize it because he's just a good dude. But yeah, man, I learn everywhere I go now.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's really powerful. So you started your podcast. You're nervous. You had a friend co-host with you for a year. You've gone through this whole journey. Now you're like hosting events. You're the face of this event that's going on. Everyone's there, because of you. And then it's like a whole event that goes on. So as a person and as an individual, how have you changed from when you started this journey to where you are today, just as a human being, would you say?
That's a really good question. I don't feel like I've changed that much. I've always kind of been me, right? Like I've always been a giver. I've always been humble. I've always been the happy-go-lucky guy. I think I've just grown a lot. Like I've gotten better marginally in pretty much everything that I do. I've gotten better in business. I've gotten better in the relationships for me have been huge. I've doubled down on the giving. And by the way, I don't mean giving like I write checks to charities. I mean like giving, meaning holding space for friends, lifting them up, giving them opportunity, all of those things. I've just gotten really good at that. But more than anything, I think I've become more, if I had to say what's changed the most about me, and this is not some like all inspiring, like that's the secret of successful entrepreneurship. But I think what's changed the most about me is that I've become more vulnerable about who I am, what I've been through, and the power in which that impacts other people. And that's been the biggest shift for me, is to open up about that stuff, man. Like I'll share a story briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Back when I was probably 20 or 21 at the time, I was dating a girl. She was actually like the first love, right? Like, oh my God, I'm in love. Like all those flutters and the hearts and all those things. And at the time, my dad was in jail, and her family was like a very staunch Catholic family. And they didn't know my dad was in jail. And we went out to dinner one time. I actually remember it was a Chinese restaurant. I remember like, because it was this monumental moment in my life. We're sitting there at the dinner table, and my ex-girlfriend's mom goes, you talk about your mom a lot. What about your dad? And my response was, oh, well, I don't talk about my dad a lot because in order for me to see him, it's only during visitation hours. Like, I kind of made a joke about it. And the girl that I was dating at the time grabbed my leg under the table, and two thoughts went through my head at the same exact time. One, well, this relationship's over. And two, I felt really free because it was the first time I was able to like openly share my story without shame. And I think sometimes we hide the things that are our strength. Right? Like when I share certain parts of my stories when I'm speaking, those are the things that resonate. The fact that my mom had an addiction, people come up and say, my parents have addictions, right? Those are the things that resonate. Those are our superpowers. And our rock bottom moments and the things that we used to have as shame as teenagers or young adults, or even sometimes as adults, that's our superpower. We just have to get past the cusp of being ashamed of it, of worrying about what people are going to think. I realize the people who judge me are the people I don't want in my life anyway. So judge away. You don't like my message. You don't like my delivery. Cool. Then I'm not for you. And I'm okay with that. And I think that's what I meant by when I said, like, that's the biggest shift in my life is like becoming more vulnerable and open about my hardships, my questions, my insecurities, and all the things in between. That's what shifted so much for me in my life. And I'm a much happier person now that I can just be like, this is me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a powerful story as well. And I think that vulnerability is huge. I mean, I know when I started my podcast, I'm an entrepreneur as well. So I was like, do I do an entrepreneurship route or do I do this influencer route? Those are my two choices. And I thought about it, and I knew that when I was in a room of people, I was gravitated most towards people that are most authentic and vulnerable. And I felt like, people who are influencers are generally more authentic and vulnerable than, someone like an entrepreneur, because they're constantly having to put themselves out there in vulnerable ways. And I definitely have felt similar too through my journeys of becoming a lot more vulnerable as well.
Yeah, man. And it's absolutely true. And those are the people that resonate with me too. Like the one thing that I do a lot is I found in our space of influencers, and it's funny, you're the first person that can say that, and I actually like the word. Like I don't always love the word influencer, but like for some odd reason, the way you position it, I like it.
Thanks.
But like what I found with like, especially young influencers, once they speak one time at an event, they refuse to just attend an event. Like I actually last 2019, I think I ended up speaking at 15 events across the country. 2020 would have been more, and it continued to grow. But I also attended events as just an attendee. And actually, when you met me, we were at Podfest and I wasn't speaking. Right. And Pablo, you were with Pablo, and he had me on his podcast. And he apparently looked at the speaker lineup and was like, oh, Justin's not speaking. I guess I won't meet him. But then was like, when he saw me, he's like, holy crap. He's like, he actually does just show up to events where he's not speaking.
Nice.
But honestly, because we have to continuously keep learning, right? And so like, how do we learn? We show up and we learn from the masters. But when I go to these events as an attendee, it's the people that are willing to open up truly about their story, not the ones who fabricate it, because there's plenty of that too. And the more you share your story authentically, and I'm sure you know this, Jeremy, the more you share your story authentically, the quicker you can read right through people and what they're trying to accomplish, right? Yeah. And so for me, same exact thing, man. And that's where, again, the impact comes from. Like there's a lot of people out there that are a mile wide and an inch deep. And I won't name anybody because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but there's plenty of people out there that are like that. I'd rather be an inch wide and a mile deep with my content and the people that I'm impacting than worry about the million. Now, if I can find a way to go a million, great. But what I care more about is the true impact that we're making and change we're making in people's lives, like you're doing with this show, man.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, I find that the more vulnerable you are, the easier it is to do those gives that help people. Because something that you may be an expert in, someone else may not be as familiar with, and you may be like, oh, well, I'll be vulnerable right now, share something that's a really small share for you. But to the other person, they're like, wow, that changes everything. Those small shares can be really impactful.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, what have you heard from your community? Like, what are some unintended consequences that you've gotten? I mean, I know that you talked about, like, in the early days that someone contacted you saying that you saved their life. So like, what are a couple of things that come to mind, or is there like another really powerful story?
So that has actually now happened about 5 or 6 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is crazy. And like the big shift for me with that is like when it first started, I didn't know what to say. And I really tried to say the right thing. And now I just listen. Like people who are in those positions, they just want to be heard. And so I try my best to listen and support. But I mean, other things, I mean, I've probably been on 30 podcasts where the people have me on and they're like, I can't believe I'm actually talking to you because of you. I actually podcast. And I think, and I joke, and I say this all the time, and I don't actually jokingly say it. I really believe this. My goal is to do what I do. And for people to see me speak on a stage or listen to my podcast and go, well, if that schmuck can do it, I can do it too. And for me, like that means the world to me. Like when people say, hey, I started podcasting because of you. Awesome. Keep going. Like that's the main thing, because I think anybody has the ability to impact others at whatever level. And I think every single person, not every single person, I believe mostly everybody has the desire to do it. And I think the people who deny that are the ones who don't think they can. But the reality is everybody has a story, and everybody has a story that resonates, right? Like people hear my story and they go, wow, that's really tough. But there's also people that hear my story and go, well, that sounds really freaking easy. My dad beat the crap out of me every single day, right? Like those are the things that like everybody has their story and everybody has whatever, but like own it, like own who you are.
Right.
And that's how you become the influencer. And that's the why behind it, is the impact that you're going to be able to make in those positions, but you have to be willing to be open and share. And one more thing I just want to add to that, and this is really important.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there, life coaches, people like that, who don't even know how to life. There's a lot of podcast coaches who don't even know how to podcast, right? They might be able to tell you what microphone to buy, but they don't actually know how to use it, utilize it. But the point of this, of saying this is this: we all go through a lot of pain. Please, please, please do not use it as a teaching point until you've learned the lesson. And so one thing I say is that our open wounds are for us to learn. Our scars are to teach other people. There are too many people right now with open wounds trying to teach other people how to get through the pain they're actually trying to make. They're trying to make it through, right? And whether that's in business or personal life or whatever. So please do the work for yourself first, because the most important thing we need is for you as an individual who's going through that pain. Not talking to you specifically, Jeremy. I know it's just weird for me to say that, but to the person going through that pain, the most important part is for you to get better, to improve, to grow, to do the things you need to do, not to profit off of it, not to feel good because one person reaches out. Because guess what? You might help somebody and they might go, wow, because of you, but your open wound is still going to be bleeding. And so make sure you take care of yourself first. Once it becomes a scar, then go teach other people. Then say, hey, this is how I'm going to teach you. I became a podcast coach because I became a successful podcaster first. I became a business coach because I built a successful business first. It is the aftermath of it. You know what I mean? That is the important part. So that's just always the asterisk in becoming an influencer and being vulnerable.
Yeah. And I mean, I would add to that and just say, like, if you have those wounds, it doesn't mean that you can't be sharing. Like if you document your growth, like if you're willing to be that vulnerable where you're like, this is what I'm struggling with, this is where I'm going, and share that, by the time you're ready to share whatever it is that you're trying to help with, you're going to have already built really deep relationships with people, because that's like as vulnerable as you can get, is getting, growing out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't fake it. If you're truly going through it, go through it.
Yeah. Awesome. So you've been podcasting for a while. You talked about how you gave yourself permission, went to that event, made some money after. So like from a high level, you don't have to share details, but people are influencing on different platforms and they're looking to make a living doing it. So what are some ways that you've been able to, like, maybe income sources from a high level that you can do when you're doing podcasting?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me personally, it was just from building community, right? But so I built a community, which then became a live event, which then became speaking, which then became a live event, which then became a mastermind, right? So all of those streams of income came because I bought a microphone, right? The microphone's my vehicle. If YouTube is your video vehicle, that's cool. If blogging is your vehicle, that's great too. But the idea is, one is you can build a community, and then from there, find out what they want and give it to them. That's it. Like it could be a physical product. It could be an online course, all of those things. So That's one way. Another way is this is a great medium to connect with human beings. And you kind of mentioned this before, and I don't remember if it was in this conversation or the conversation before, so excuse me.
Yeah, might have been both.
Yeah, who knows? But, people utilizing podcasts to get clients. Look, here's the thing. If you have something great to sell to somebody, the best way to get in front of your ideal client is to interview them. Like I say, look, if you're trying to sell to a CEO of a company, if you send him a cold email to try and sell him something, he's not going to reply, or he's going to say, get out of here. Right. But if you reach out and say, hey, I've got a podcast. I love what you're doing with your business. Let's have a chat. He's going to give you 45 minutes of his time. He's going to get open and vulnerable, and he's going to talk about his story. It's going to be a little bit easier to sell him on the back end. So that's another way to utilize this platform, is to build those strong relationships. Right. And then in general, like I know people who have podcasts, and I don't personally do it yet, but affiliate marketing, things like that. Because selling advertising in a podcast platform, which you can do as well, you have to have massive numbers for it to really move the needle at all. Like I've gotten offers from companies, and it's just not worth it. It's not worth it for me to sell out my business or sell out my listeners to run an ad that barely pays a bill, right? Like I'm like, that just doesn't make sense. And so that's just the reality of podcast advertising dollars. But there's other ways you can do it: partnerships, packaging things together, affiliate marketing, getting clients from it, building out from your community. That is just the tip of the iceberg of things that you can really do with this platform. But for me, it was, I built a community and then I served them. I said, what do you want? And then I delivered.
Yeah. And when you have that community, you can just ask them, what do you want? And then that's how the event came out of it. Then the mastermind came out of that.
Yeah. Like when I asked my audience what they wanted, and some people were saying mastermind. I started the mastermind. Somebody joined the mastermind, and they literally said, I've been waiting for Justin to start this for at least a year. Like that's the thing. You don't know unless you ask, right?
Right.
So ask what they want and deliver. And you're going to be pleasantly surprised with the fact that how quickly they're going to become clients.
Very cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
For sure.
All right. So before I open the floor for you to say the best way for people to reach out to you, and thank you for coming on here today. Knowing the types of listeners we have, people that are trying to go bigger with their voices, both, people overcoming barriers to start and also to go bigger that are already established. Do you have any last words for the listeners here today?
Yeah. I'll actually share something with them that my mom shared with me after one of my businesses failed. So my business failed, and I called my mom and I was like, hey, we're shutting the doors. And the story essentially is we were going to do a business event, and we paid a speaker a lot of money. We spent a ton of money on marketing. We sold 3 tickets to the event. Like all of our money was gone, and we weren't recouping it. Like there was okay, we're going to retry this. And so I called my mom and I said, we're shutting the business. And my mom said something any mom probably would have said, but the impact has become exponential long-term. And she said, Justin, you're headed in the right direction. Keep your head up and keep moving forward. And it made me realize that as long as I am headed in the right direction, I'm going to be okay. Don't worry so much about the 1 million followers or the $1 million or whatever. Worry about today. What can you do today to get closer to that? The one thing that I've learned over the last couple of years is whether it's 1 million followers, 1 million downloads, 2 million downloads, $1 million, $2 million. When you get there, you're going to go, okay, now how do I get to 10 million? And it was like this aha moment of the goal is not the win. To reach that peak is not the win. The win is enjoying the journey. And so if anybody who's trying to reach more people, enjoy the journey, be true to who you are, keep your head up and keep moving forward, because I promise you that in the long run, it's going to pay off.
Awesome. Yeah. Powerful stuff. Just keep moving forward. That's the main thing. And you've brought that up multiple times during this conversation, and it's definitely something that is needed to keep pushing through for stuff like this.
For sure.
All right. So what's the best way for someone to connect with you? If someone, on top of, if they got value that like, hey, you said something that's meaningful, can I send you a message? Can I listen to your podcast, go to your event? What do you suggest?
Yeah, man. So anybody watching live now, I normally, like I told you this before in your group, I normally just say, hey, go listen to the podcast. But I know we're live streaming on YouTube and stuff like that. So it's a different type of audience. if they're interested in learning from some of the titans of online business, people I get to call friends, like Nick Santanastasso, Anthony Trucks, Natalie Jill, myself, they can actually come to my virtual event that's next weekend. So it's gnmlive.com/virtual. They can get their tickets there. It's only $29. So that's one way. If they want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Justin T. Schenck. And if they're later listening to this on audio on podcast, here's the simplest way. Wherever you're listening right now, stop, go into the app, search Growth Now Movement, give it a listen. If you like it, I just ask that you subscribe and follow me along on my journey. Because look, I'm still growing, and so is everybody else in my community, and I would love for you guys to grow with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Justin. And yeah, I definitely encourage you, if you're listening now, to go check out that event. The link is in the description, and it's this weekend. Once the podcast is out, it might have already passed, but there's more events coming. So the best way just to stay connected would be to subscribe to this podcast. So go give it a listen if you like it, and subscribe. And feel free to Instagram message him something if you got some value here today.
Awesome. Jeremy, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you. And before I let you go, I do like to ask, puts me in a vulnerable spot sometimes too, but for feedback on, now that you spoke at my meetup, now you've spoke at my podcast back to back, do you have any feedback, like positive, constructive? Very open to that.
Dude, I love what you're doing. And here's why. You've niched down into a niche that you can serve properly. A lot of people try and niche down and they can't really serve them. So I respect and honor you for that. I love the community that you're building. I love the fact, like, there's not many people that can go, hey, we're doing a weekly call and there's 30 people that show up. There's not many people that do that. It means you're headed in the right direction. I can't wait till there's 100 people every single week, because that's going to happen because you're consistent. Key, right? And I love the format of this. Like, I love how you dive into the business side and also the life side. Dude, this is great, man. Like, more people need to find you. And so whenever this comes out, I'll share it out. I don't even know, but yeah, we got to get more people to find you, man, and blow this thing up even more than it's already blown up, because it's freaking cool. You're doing a good job.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Justin. It means a lot.
Yeah, man.
All right. Well, if you're listening here today, you made it to the end. First of all, I just want to say thank you for listening. Thanks for listening to Justin's story. I hope you got some value. You may not know it yet, but you're taking the steps in the right direction. So just make sure you take action. So if there's something that you haven't taken action on that's holding you back, just start, do that thing and move to the next step, and keep taking those steps to, stay consistent, to get started, things like that. And I forgot to mention, because it's a new thing, but this episode is sponsored by TubeBuddy. I'm not used to shouting it out yet, so I should have done it at the beginning. But TubeBuddy is a software that is a plugin for your internet browser, and it helps you optimize on YouTube. So if you don't use it, we have a link for our group. It gives you 30 days for the premium package. And then also at our weekly meetup that we do, which there's a link to the meetup on my website, WhyInfluence.com. There you'll be able to potentially win a free 3 months of TubeBuddy for attending the meetup. But if you're going to do any call to action after this, it's going to be go to Justin's podcast and go subscribe there. So thanks again, Justin, for coming today.